Did I break up with my girlfriend for sending her nudes to my brother? Disclaimer is not my story time. I sent them on Instagram. I'm a 25-year-old guy and my brother is 23. We have always had a really good relationship. We're really close. We play sports together. We just spend a lot of time together in general. My girlfriend and I have only known each other for a year. We started dating 2 months later, so we've been together for about 7 to 8 months. To be honest, I don't exactly know how long. Am I the perfect man? No. Are we the perfect couple? No. But you know what? I put a lot of effort into our relationship. For example, she gets really bad mood swings when she has her period. So I always make the effort to go buy her groceries. I fill up her car with gas. And on her first day of her period, I always go over to her apartment and make her a nice meal. And I always buy her favorite vegan cupcakes from Whole Foods. Sure, I always forget about our anniversary and stuff like that, but it's the big things that count, you know? So my girlfriend always jokes about how cute my brother is. I mean, is it really cute? I don't know. He's just my brother. She'll go out of her way to make comments about him. Now, I'm not a jealous guy, so I never really say anything. She did make a comment in front of my brother and it made him uncomfortable. So afterwards, I asked her not to say those things in front of my brother. And if you must know, go to part 2 to see what she said about my brother. Break up with my girlfriend for sending her nudes to my brother. Disclaimer isn't on my story time. I sent them on Instagram. While we're sitting at dinner with my parents, she says, "Your brother is hot AF." My brother looks up from his dinner plate and just stares at me. My mom laughed awkwardly, and my dad literally didn't know what she was talking about. I could see how uncomfortable it made my brother. So after the dinner, I asked my girlfriend to not make any comments about how good looking my brother is. But then her weird obsession with my brother just got worse. He and I are both really into fitness and usually go to the gym together. And she started coming to the gym with us. Except she would follow my brother around like a lost puppy at the gym. Again, my brother would just turn to look at me and be like, "Can you come grab her?" So I physically had to pull her away from my brother. After a couple of times of us going to the gym and this happening, I sat her down and told her that she really needed to stop this time. Honestly, at this point, I found it kind of funny. My girlfriend's also really funny, so she makes everything into a joke. So honestly, I didn't assume anything terrible about it. Not until a few weeks ago when everything went down. Brother started dating a new girl. He showed my girlfriend a picture of her. My girlfriend immediately started judging her by her looks. She pretty much said she was ugly and that she had really bad skin. And that my brother could do a lot better. Part 3 is did I break up with my girlfriend for sending her nudes to my brother? Disclaimer is not my story time. I sent them on Instagram. After my girlfriend started ripping into my brother's new girlfriend, I put my foot down and told her that she needed to stop immediately. My brother was clearly uncomfortable, and still she thought it was all a funny joke. As I drove her home, I asked her why she had to do that. She went on a rant about how hot my brother was and how ugly his new girlfriend was. And again, she started criticizing everything about her physically. Said her hair was dry, that she had too many pimples, that she was shaped like a little boy. That's when I told her that she didn't need to say everything she thought. As I dropped her off at her place, I decided to go to the gym. 5 seconds after stepping into the gym, my brother sends me a screenshot of 2 nudes my girlfriend sent him. Call my brother and he says, "Dude, WTF." Then I call my girlfriend and she says, "What's up?" Enter the screenshot and she said, "Oh my god, I must have sent that by mistake. I'm so sorry." And I said, "Why would you send that by mistake?" She came up with this whole story about how she was actually trying to send them to me. And she sent me a screenshot of her messages. And she said that she probably just clicked on his by mistake. I don't believe it. I basically ghosted her for an entire week. My brother's still pretty pissed off. She's begging me to come back to her, but I don't know what to do. Could she be telling the truth? Story time about how my boyfriend shames me for having cellulite. Disclaimer is not my story time. It's sending me on Instagram. I'm 24 years old and my boyfriend is 21. According to him, he has never been with any girl who's had cellulite before, or even an ounce of body fat. Yes, I know what you're thinking. He's a total asshole, which in that sense, he is. But the rest of the time, he's completely fine and actually sweet. We met last year at a friend's party. At the party, I instantly fell in love with him. I thought he was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. And it was reciprocated. I saw him from across the room and he made eye contact. A few minutes later, he walked over to me and just struck up a conversation. I know that people present themselves the way they want to be seen, especially when they're trying to impress someone they're attracted to. He started telling me about how he's studying to be a doctor, how he volunteers at animal shelters, and that every single weekend he also volunteers at the soup kitchen. Everything he said was absolutely perfect. By the end of the night, he had asked me out on a date and I said yes. I did explain to him that I didn't want anything serious and he said that was totally fine. I was trying to focus on my studies, so having a boyfriend was not in my plans. But after we went on 7 dates, he asked me to be his girlfriend. He wouldn't take no for an answer. After about a month, I finally said yes. Mind you, at this point, he hadn't seen me naked, not even in a bathing suit. The very night that I said yes to being his girlfriend, he asked me to come over to his place. He made a whole gourmet dinner, even bought super expensive wine. So we ended up doing it for the first time that night. The next morning when I woke up, the first thing he said to me was, "Do you ever exercise?" I was shocked. Part 2 is up. Story time about how my boyfriend shames me for having cellulite. Disclaimers are not my story time. I sent me on Instagram. That's when he said point blank, super serious, "Do you ever exercise?" I just stared at him. I had literally just woken up in his bed after the first time we ever did it. Then I thought he must be joking. So I started to laugh a little, and then he says, "No, seriously, do you ever exercise?" I said, "Sometimes." Then he told me, "You should really try to work out at least 5 times a week." I went home and finally texted him saying that I wasn't comfortable with the way he spoke to me. That's when he said that what he said to me was completely normal, and that I shouldn't be offended. This was all in text, by the way. That's when he sends me another another text message saying, you know, you wouldn't have as much cellulite as you do if you didn't eat so much fast food. And if you exercise 5 times a week like I told you. I didn't reply to him for the rest of the day. Later that day, he shows up to my apartment and says, you know, I should feel comfortable enough to tell you what I think about you. He somehow ended up making me feel bad and I ended up apologizing. Obviously, after that, I became really self-conscious about my cellulite and my entire body. So anytime we were together, I would always stay under the covers. By the way, my boyfriend doesn't have a great body. He's super soft and pudgy. Last week, he told me that he had abs though. Part 3 is about how my boyfriend shames me for having cellulite. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, it's on Instagram. One day he pulls up his shirt and says, look, I have abs. Which no, he doesn't. He's super soft and has a thick layer of fat on it. I smirked and he said, what? And I said, you don't have abs. Then he says, yes, I do. I'm in better shape than you. By the way, he said this in front of his friends. So I was super embarrassed and stayed quiet the entire day. He finally went to drop me off and I was so happy to be home. But he decided to come upstairs with me. Got straight into my PJs. And when I came out of my bedroom, he says, wow, your cellulite's getting worse by the day. That's when I finally broke. I turned around and started yelling at him. I told him he had no right to talk about my body the way that he did, and that all he does is objectify me. He started laughing and said, wow, those are big words. And that when we met, he thought that I was in better shape. My clothes obviously tricked him. I'm 5'4" and I weigh 130 pounds. I am by no means fat, but the way that he was bullying me was making me think that I was. That's when I told him that he was the fat one, and that he had a big, huge beer belly. I also told him that his face was super round, but that didn't bother me. Oh yeah, and that his hairy back was gross. Then he said, wow, I can't believe you're attacking my physical appearance. Then he stormed out of my apartment, and as soon as he left, I felt happy. We haven't spoken in 4 days. I'm afraid that if he asks me to get back with him, I will. But I should just break up with him, right? What should I do? Story time about how my boyfriend tried to cheat on me with my fake Instagram account, not knowing it was really me. Disclaimer, is not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. The funny thing is that when my boyfriend and I got together, I did not want the relationship. He begged me for 6 months to be his girlfriend. And you see, the only reason why I didn't want to was because I knew that he was a player. Every single one of my friends had basically gone out with him. I was just the last girl in the group to go out with him because I always kept saying no. And looking back, he was definitely obsessed with me because I never gave in to him. I was the girl that he couldn't have. During those 6 months, he would hit me up on Instagram every single day. Anytime I posted a story, he would automatically reply to it. He would like and comment on all of my pictures. We also had a lot of mutual friends, so we would end up at the same events and parties. And every time that he would see me in public, he would zero in on me. He would basically ignore all the other girls at the party and make me feel like I was the only one there. And he would constantly compliment me and tell me how beautiful I was, how attracted to me he was, how I was just so different from all the other girls that he had gone out with. Trust me, I knew that he was love bombing me, but eventually after 6 months, I was like, he's gotta be honest. So I decided to give him a chance. And let me tell you, he has been the perfect boyfriend. He's so sweet and considerate. My parents absolutely adore him. And my mom never likes anybody. See, I come from a Latino family. One day I decided to make a second Instagram account. It was just an inspiration account. I posted cute outfits of other people I liked, makeup, nails. Still one day I see my boyfriend in my DMs. Part 2 is of how my boyfriend tried to cheat on me with my fake Instagram and not knowing it was actually me. Disclaimers to know my story time is sending me on Instagram. That's when I opened up my account to see that my boyfriend had DM'd me. First I thought he was joking. When I clicked into the message and I read it, my heart and my stomach sank. He was taking a shot. He thought that I was some sort of influencer. Now when I created the second account, I was already with him. But I really didn't tell him that I was creating it. It was just for fun for myself. I did start gaining followers. I did put in a lot of work into this account, but it was pretty much a visual diary just for me. It just so happens that other girls liked the aesthetic and I started gaining a lot of followers. I had about 10,000. But here's my theory. Since my account is probably listed to be in the area that he is, probably popped up on one of his mutual lists or his explore page or something like that, because I was trying to figure out how he found the account. The message read, "Hey beautiful, I really love your pictures and love your style. I'm also really into fashion. Lol, no he's not. And I would love to take you out on a date. I know all the good spots around the city. Let me know if you're down." So when I clicked on my boyfriend's profile and realized that he had hidden all of the pictures we had together. So if he had DM'd any girl and she went to look at his profile, she would automatically assume that he's single because he doesn't have a picture of another girl. Instead of freaking out and calling him, I decided to keep cool. Instead, I called my mom. She told me to play along with the conversation. So that's what I did. Messaged him back and said, "Wow, I really love your pictures and your style too. What's your favorite designer?" He replied, "Louis Vuitton." Ew. By the end of the conversation, we had a date for that night. And I showed up. Part 3 is up. Story time about how my boyfriend tried to cheat on me with my fake Instagram account, not knowing it was me. Disclaimer is not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. At the end of the conversation he thought he was having with some other girl, we had decided to go on a date. And like I said, I was playing along, so I was super nice to him. I complimented all the clothes that he wore. I told him that he looked so attractive in his pictures and that I was really looking forward to meeting him. He chose a restaurant downtown. And of course he did, because I live nowhere near that area. In fact, he and I never go out on dates there. So he knew that he wouldn't see anybody he knew. Here's where it gets actually really funny. This man sent a picture of the outfit outfit he wanted to wear. A brown fedora with the Louis Vuitton monogram on it, a Louis Vuitton belt, black pants, and a black shirt. So I replied saying, "That's perfect. I'll wear a black dress and my favorite Louis Vuitton purse." But I was still heartbroken. Here's what I did. I asked my mom to come with me to the restaurant. Her and I did our makeup, our hair, and we got dressed up really nice. And I decided to wear a black dress. My mom actually happened to have an old Louis Vuitton purse in her closet that she never wore, so I grabbed it. My mom and I show up to the restaurant and my boyfriend is already there. So I decided to walk in and turn around, so that way he could only see my back. My mom decided to stay outside of the restaurant, but she knew to come in as soon as he saw me. I suddenly feel a tap on my shoulder and that's when I turn around. He says, "Oh, hey babe, what are you doing here?" The look on this man's face was of pure fear. That's when I hand him my phone so that he could see that the account that he was messaging was actually mine. That's when he says, "You lied to me?" He was mad at me for pretending to be somebody else. Then he started apologizing, and then he said that he knew the whole time and that he was just joking around. I broke up with him and haven't spoken to him since. Story time about how I got my sister's boyfriend to fall in love with me, and I do not regret it. Disclaimer is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. My sister and I have always been rivals since we were kids. I'm 22 and she's 24. We were always super close in age, which means we competed for everything, including our parents' attention, clothes and makeup, and somehow we always ended up liking the same boys. When I turned 16, she was going away for college, and I actually started to appreciate her a lot more. We started calling each other every single day, and I realized that I really miss my sister. We actually got closer living further away than together. My parents were also really happy with this because her and I would not get along when she lived at home. One weekend I decided to go stay with her on her campus, and that's when things got interesting. My sister was living it up. She was partying all the time. I told her that I didn't really like that she was partying so much. I told her that I didn't feel comfortable with her passing out at random guys' places. She told me that I was overreacting and not to tell my parents. But I got home and told my parents everything. This is when our relationship became bad once again. After this, my sister didn't trust me and basically she became my enemy. She started criticizing everything about me, the clothes that I'd wear, so I had to distance myself from her. My parents wanted her to move back in with us because she wasn't doing well in school. She was clearly partying instead of studying. Of course, my sister refused to move back home, so my parents basically cut her off. I got a new boyfriend at this time, and my sister would flirt with him anytime she came home. I even caught them hugging one time. Part 2 is that story time about how I stole my sister's boyfriend and don't regret it. Disclaimers in my story time and send me on Instagram. When I walked in on my boyfriend and my sister hugging, I knew I had to do something. I went straight to my parents and told them what she was doing. My dad pulled her into her room and talked to her, but she totally denied everything. She said that she was not flirting with my boyfriend, but we all knew that was a lie. Even my boyfriend was honest with me and told me that she had been flirting with him openly. That's when my boyfriend told me he didn't even want to come over to our house because my sister made him that uncomfortable. And when I told my parents this, they felt so embarrassed. They called my boyfriend and personally apologized to him. He was actually so sweet though. He would come visit me to my house and we would just chill out in his car while my sister was inside watching us through the window. Yeah, she was crazy. He and I eventually broke up because he went off to live in another country. And guess what? My sister said that she knew he never loved me and that's why he left me. She was being so mean at the time. A few years later, she started dating someone. Of course, at the time, it never occurred to me to even flirt with him or act the way that she did with my boyfriend. You see, I'm above all that. But as soon as I got a new boyfriend, she would start flirting with him. And she had no shame about it. This became a running problem in my family. My parents would ask her to leave me alone and my boyfriends, and she would say that she did. But no, she didn't. Oh yeah, and her boyfriend broke up with her because he noticed that she would flirt with a lot of guys. Apparently, she did it even in front of him. So when she finally got a new boyfriend, I decided that I was gonna do the same thing to her. I started flirting with her boyfriend a little. Not a lot, but I definitely made sure to tell him I thought he was attractive. After a few weeks, he started saying things back to me, and I knew that it was working. I never did it in front of my sisters and my parents because I didn't want them to get mad at me. So instead, I got her boyfriend to basically fall in love with me. I already knew everything about him because my sister would tell me, so I just started telling him I liked the same things he did. It got to the point where one day he kissed me and I didn't tell my parents. I made sure to get his hopes up. Part 3 is up. I got my sister's boyfriend to fall in love with me, her life turned to misery. No, I didn't regret it. Disclaimers is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. One day I went up to my sister and told her that her boyfriend had kissed me. First she thought I was making it up to make her jealous. Told me I could never compete with her and that she was the more beautiful sister out of the two of us. Which is wrong. So I handed her my phone so that she could see all the messages that her boyfriend and I had been sending each other. And that's when she lost it. She started wailing on me. She started slapping and kicking me. My parents ran into her room and asked her what was wrong. I told my parents that I treated my sister the way she treated me. She would always go after my boyfriends, flirt with them, and try to get them to break up with me. Of course, my parents didn't agree with me, so they were really angry. They separated us, but my sister went crazy. She called her boyfriend and told him to come over. Obviously, he didn't know that she already knew at the time. And when he came over, she started beating him up. She grabbed a pan from the kitchen and started swinging at him. She actually ended up giving him a concussion. After that, she begged for his forgiveness, but he still broke up with her. At the end of the day, he ended up leaving her. She was so stupid for begging him to stay with her. Her boyfriend even asked me if we could be together, and I told him no. I told him that the whole time I had just been playing him just to get back at my sister. Which I know is so cruel, but he deserved it. After that, my sister and I decided to make peace. She told me that she wouldn't mess with my boyfriends anymore and that she would stop being evil. But after a month of having my new boyfriend, I found her flirting with him too. I told her if she didn't stop that I would make her life miserable once again. I'm pretty sure she has a boyfriend, but she doesn't want to tell my family. Cause she knows that I'll go after him and I would probably end up making him fall in love with me too. But at this point, I just don't know what to do. What should I do? She's so evil and I want to make her life miserable. Bye. Story time about how I became an IG model / escort for billionaires. I'll tell you that last month I made $60,000. This clear is not my story time and send me on Instagram. So at the beginning I had to lie about my age. I'm really 36 years old, but I say I'm 22. I do look a lot younger than I am, and of course I get filler and Botox. I started my Instagram account 6 years ago. My inspirations were Anna Cherie, Amanda Lee, I am JoJo, and Abigail Ratchford. I mean Abigail Ratchet. I basically copied all of these girls' pictures. Within a month of starting my Instagram account, I had 10,000 followers. And yes, all of them were males. But I didn't really start making money until 2018. You know, like every other girl on Instagram, I signed up for OF. And that's when I started making serious money. But I was also making money from Instagram. Brands would send me clothes and watches and protein powder, stuff like that. Eventually, I became an ambassador for one of the biggest Instagram clothing stores. I think we all know what I'm talking about. Fashion Hova, and I started making a lot of money then. So I basically started living above my means. I got myself a new apartment in Beverly Hills, and it was $6,000 a month. I also got myself a Mercedes, and I would exclusively shop at Air One. I would also go shopping at Rodeo Drive almost every day because I wanted the paparazzi to get pictures of me. And I even called the paparazzi on me a few times, so I had to pay them like $2,000 out of pocket. So yeah, I was spending a lot of money. Whatever money I got that month, I would literally spend it by the end. One month I spent $25,000 going out with friends. I would usually pick up the bill. This is what started getting me into trouble. Part 2 is story time about how I became an IG model / escort for billionaires. After I spent the $25,000 in 1 month, I decided I needed another income source. So I thought of escorting. One of my very good friends in LA was also an escort, and she told me about it, but I was like, I can't do that. But one day I called her and she told me everything. She gets contacted through Instagram by very, very rich men, like billionaires. I honestly didn't believe her at first, but then she showed me receipts. Her bank account had more than $1 million in it. She told me that she had only been doing it for 6 months. She put me in contact with several people and they had to verify a bunch of my stuff. Then after a week, I was finally in. But I was really scared. I had to go get my passport renewed. This meant that I was going to be traveling internationally with men that I didn't know. A few days later, I get a message on Instagram from an account. The guy that owned this account was clearly very rich. It wasn't him contacting me, it was his assistant. He got my information and 2 days later, I was on a private plane. I landed in a foreign country and I spent the entire weekend with this guy. He didn't speak English. Basically took me around his city and showed me off for his friends. I honestly didn't feel uncomfortable at any point and he didn't try anything. In fact, he was actually super shy, but his friends on the other hand were really handsy. Part 3 is up. Story time about how I became an Instagram model / escort for billionaires. That's when his friends started getting really handsy. We were in a really expensive high-rise and the apartment was literally worth millions. And I knew that all of these guys were used to getting whatever they wanted. One of the friends actually grabbed my arm and told me to sit on his lap, but I told him I couldn't. He wasn't the one that hired me to be there, so I had to go straight to the guy that hired me. I told him that his friends were making me uncomfortable and he said, okay, we should leave then. I was actually shocked that he listened to what I wanted. Now one of my regular clients and I travel with him almost every 2 months. So let me tell you how much he paid me. For the 3-day weekend, I ended up with $50,000. Yep, that's right. But let me tell you a little about the dark side of this. A few jobs later, I ended up with somebody who was completely crazy. I ended up going to Vegas with this guy. He was approximately 10 years younger than me and was filthy rich. But he was also a complete psycho. He bought me this whole outfit that he wanted me to wear the entire night. I told him I was more comfortable in my clothes. I was wearing a Fendi dress. It looked great. That's when he said, no, you're gonna wear this. I ended up walking around Vegas in a micro mini skirt and a bikini top. By the end of this night, he was getting really aggressive. I tried to stay quiet, hoping that he would just forget that I was in his car. Suddenly, he turned to look at me and wanted me to do something. When I said no, he grabbed me by the hair and told me that he owned me for the night. Then he said, I'll add an extra $20,000 in there for you. And it does get worse. But now I learned to save my money. I no longer pay for my friends' drinks and food. I still have my $6,000 apartment and I upgraded my car. I live like a princess. I also bought my parents a house though. It was definitely one of the happiest days of my life. And believe it or not, I actually did end up finding love. My boyfriend is okay with my job, but he just asked me to be safe. Of course, he asked me every day to quit because he wants to support me, but he can't give me the life I've given myself. What should I do? Story time about how I found my husband's secret phone. Disclaimer is not my story time, it's sent me on Instagram. I found 5 dating apps and 2 secret girlfriends on his phone. And I can't even begin to tell you what I found on Instagram. Up until this point, my husband and I had the utmost respect and trust for each other. I never once thought he was capable of doing this. Literally every woman says that when they find out their man is cheating. Around 6 months ago, my husband started a new job. He's in tech and makes a lot of money, so I've been able to stay at home with our kids. We now have 2 kids, and they're both 2 and 5. Our life is amazing. Our parents live near us. We always make time for each other and go out on dates. We even take solo trips on the weekends. Last year, we went to Bali for 2 weeks. My point is, we always make time for each other. When he started his new job, he started earning more money. But this also meant that he took on a lot more work. He was always so stressed out. My husband and I met in college and we studied the exact same thing. We both worked for the same company. Eventually, I retired to take care of our kids. So when he got his new job, I offered to help him out with his work. He was actually really grateful for this, and we were both doing a really good job. He was working from home 3 days out of the week. So it was a great situation. We were spending time together, working together, and the kids were spending more time with their dad. His new job gave him a new cell phone, and this is the cell phone that I would usually use to help him out with his work and his laptop. Part 2 is up. Story time about how I found my husband's secret cell phone, his 2 girlfriends, and his 5 dating apps. Disclaimers is not my story time, it's me on Instagram. I started using his work cell phone to help him out with his job, and he kept his own cell phone. This is when I started noticing that he would make a big deal about losing his phone. Anytime he would misplace it, he would go absolutely berserk. Now, I thought it was just because he was stressed about work, till I realized it wasn't stress. He forgot to silence his phone one night, and the notifications were going off. I woke him up and asked him to turn it off. My mind did not go to him cheating. I thought it was work-related stuff. But then I realized it was his personal phone that was going off, not his work phone. The next day, he apologized for having his work notifications on, and I said, but it wasn't your work phone, it was your personal phone. And he said, no, it wasn't. And I said, yes, it was. And that's when he accused me of being paranoid and crazy. And that's when I knew he was cheating. I had to keep it cool, though. I was feeding the kids in the kitchen when this all happened. On this day, he was going to go to work. I knew that he was going to take his personal and his work phone with him to the office. So what I did was change the phone covers on each phone and flip them upside down. He grabbed the work phone thinking it was his personal phone. He put it in his pocket and went to the bathroom. And he left his work phone, which was his personal phone, on the countertop. I told him that maybe I should keep it just in case I needed to answer emails, and he said yes. He left, and I had his phone all to myself. As soon as I opened his personal phone, I went straight to the messages, and I found his 2 girlfriends, Laura and Missy. Part 3 is story time about how I found my husband's secret phone, his 2 girlfriends, and his 5 dating apps. Disclaimers are not my story time, it's me on Instagram. I started reading through the text messages between his 2 girlfriends. I scrolled and scrolled and scrolled. He had been together with the first girl for 2 months, and the second girl just for 3 weeks. And in the messages, he was totally bad-mouthing me. He was telling them that I was crazy and abusive, and that's how he justified his cheating to them. I also read in some of the messages that he was complaining about our kids, how spoiled and ungrateful my kids were, and that's why he wanted to escape the house to be with them. Let me tell you, our kids are so considerate and so loving towards us. They're very affectionate children, and they never get upset at their dad whenever he has to go to work. So for him to be talking badly about our children just made everything 10 times worse. After reading the messages for about 2 or 3 minutes, I went to the bathroom and vomited. I was physically ill. His messages were so perverted too. I know that when you start a new relationship, you're always trying to impress people, but he just took it too far. After I vomited, I went back to his phone and kept reading the messages. This is when I found out that he was paying both of these girls rents. So the whole time I'm helping him with his job to earn money for our family, half of that was going to these women. I got sick again. After I calmed down for a few minutes, I went back to his phone. Then I found his dating apps. His dating profile was so disgusting too. He was all about fitness and mental health. He also claimed that he was single in his dating profiles. So on top of him cheating on me, he was cheating on his 2 girlfriends. This time I didn't bother reading all the messages he had in the dating apps, but I did notice that he was going on dates with multiple girls several times a week. Later on, I found out that the whole work situation was a lie. He was working from home the entire time, but going on dates. I took screenshots of everything and went straight to my lawyer. I filed for divorce that very same day. When my husband came home, I confronted him and he denied everything. Even with all the proof, he's still denying it. He's not speaking to our children, and you better believe I'm getting half of all his money. Bye. Story time about the day my husband attacked me and put me in the hospital. Disclaimers is not my story time, it's me on Instagram. My husband and I had been married for 7 years. 3 years into the marriage, he started sleeping on the couch. We would constantly fight back then because of several things. Number 1, I knew he was cheating on me, but he would never admit to it. Number 2, I wanted to have children, but he didn't want to at the time. Number 3, he never wanted to spend time with me and always prioritized his friends. And this was around the time that he started getting physically violent. Because we'd already been married for a few years at that point, I never saw him as a violent person. It all started by him shoving me one time during an argument. But he shoved me so hard I fell to the ground and ended up bruising my chin. And even though this was a big problem between me and him, it became an even bigger problem between me and my family. As soon as my parents saw the bruise, they started accusing him of beating me. And of course, my first instinct was to defend my husband. My parents begged me to stay with them and I didn't. I went back to my husband and demanded an apology, but he wouldn't even look me in the face. He told me he basically did not care. Once he started sleeping on the couch, it was just like we were roommates. We stayed like this for years. Anytime we got into an argument, he would just look for something to throw at me. One day he threw a jewelry box at me and I ended up in the ER. And of course, the hospital thought it was my husband. So I lied and said that I tripped. And unfortunately, I went straight back to my husband. Part 2 is Tell me about the day my husband attacked me and put me in the hospital. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, it's set me on Instagram. After years of him pushing me, shoving me, throwing things at me, and even slapping me, I became so numb to it. It would get me really angry and upset at the moment, but as soon as he would apologize, we would just go back to normal. But even our normal wasn't normal. We didn't sleep in the same bed. He was never really home, and when he was always playing video games. This was also around the time that he lost his job, so for 5 years, I was basically the breadwinner. He told me he didn't want to get a job and he wanted to play video games. I didn't tell him anything because I didn't want it to turn into a fight. But I was angry at the thought that I had to now support him. But like I said, my parents did not like him at all. They knew something was up because I always had some sort of bruise. My parents made it a habit of showing up unannounced to our house. I was actually really grateful to my parents. This didn't upset me at all. But my husband, on the other hand, hated my parents. One day he asked me, why do they even care about you so much? You're not that important. Around a year ago, I started feeling really sick all the time. At the time, I didn't know why. One day, I walk into the kitchen and see my husband holding eye drops in his hand, but he quickly put it away. I asked him why he was holding that, and he said nothing, mind your own business. So I did. A few months later, I'm having a conversation with a coworker, and he told me a story about somebody using eye drops on someone else to make them sick. This is when it all clicked. I had all these weird stomach issues, and I never realized that it was him putting eye drops in my coffee. This is when I decided to file for divorce. Instead of filing for divorce and leaving him, I went home and told him that I was going to get a divorce. He grabbed a hammer and started chasing me. I locked myself in the bathroom. Part 3 is up. Tell me about the day my husband attacked me and put me in the hospital. Disclaimer, is not my story time, it's set me on Instagram. When I saw him grab the hammer, I started instantly running. I ran straight to the bathroom and locked myself. The good thing is that he would never damage this house because he does love it, so he didn't swing at the door. I stayed in the bathroom for an hour explaining to him why I wanted to get a divorce. After the 2 hours, I thought he had calmed down. He basically told me that he would give me the divorce with no problem. But let me remind you, I was the breadwinner and he had no job. He was completely dependent on me. But as soon as I opened the door, he pushed in and started hitting me. Unfortunately, I didn't tell anyone in my family what my plan was. Suddenly, I wake up and I realize I'm on the ground. 4 hours had passed. I get up and look at myself in the mirror, and my face was completely swollen. I walk into the living room and my husband was there playing video games, just like he did every day all day. As soon as he sees me, he says, "You better go wash your face." Instead, I grabbed my things and ran out. He didn't even bother chasing me. I called my parents on the way to the hospital and they met me there. Luckily, there was no major damage. My parents helped me file a police report, and when the police showed up to see my husband, he had cleaned the bathroom. Guess what he told them? That he was the one that wanted to divorce me because I was crazy, and that I had made up the whole attack. He says that I must have hit myself in the face. That's when the cops asked him, "How do you know that she was hit in the face?" Gotcha. He said he had assumed that I was being hit in the face. My brothers and parents went over and kicked him out. I sold the place and bought a house down the street from my parents. I am now so much happier. I feel like I'm aging backwards from not being around him. The constant feel and nervousness I felt around him took a toll on me, and I just hadn't realized it. To this day, he says he did nothing, and the cops have done nothing against him. I need proof, so what should I do? Mother-in-law is so terrible that I'm considering breaking up with my boyfriend. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, I said me on Instagram. My mother-in-law has done everything in her power to separate my boyfriend and I. And though she doesn't admit it, she loves it. When my boyfriend and I started dating, we were both really happy, really loving and affectionate. We love to spend time with each other, so our relationship is really well-rounded. In fact, my boyfriend comes to my apartment every single day. Without me asking him, he always just wants to spend time with me. After 3 weeks of dating, we decided we'd meet each other's parents. Even though he was incredibly nervous to meet my parents, they went out of their way to make him feel at home. My parents had invited us over for dinner, and they literally made his favorite foods and even bought his favorite dessert. Needless to say, my parents loved him and he loved my parents. The following week, we met his parents. It went okay, I guess. His parents wanted to take us out to dinner, which was nice. His dad was super charismatic, funny, and made a lot of conversation. His mom hugged me and kissed me, so I thought she was okay. But throughout the dinner, she would kind of look at me and not really say anything. Basically, she only responded when my boyfriend talked. Obviously, I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I didn't tell my boyfriend anything. Next day, I get a text message from my mother-in-law. She asked me to have lunch with her. Just the 2 of us. Part 2 is up. Mother-in-law is so terrible that I'm considering breaking up with my boyfriend. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, I said me on Instagram. She asked me out to have lunch by ourselves. I said yes. During the lunch, she took me to this really fancy restaurant, and she did not tell me that it was so fancy. So I showed up in jeans and a cardigan. As soon as she sees me, she says, "Oh, why didn't you wear a dress?" I told her I didn't realize the restaurant was so fancy, and I apologized. She said it was okay and for me to sit down quickly. By the way, my boyfriend's family has a lot of money, so she's accustomed to the, nicer things in life. Not so bad sitting in that restaurant with my cheap jeans and my cardigan, while everyone else was in dresses and beautiful sandals. We made small talk and it was actually kind of nice. After we ordered, she started asking me questions though. She started asking me how many boyfriends I'd had in the past, what my friends were like, and she even asked me how much money I earned per year. She was clearly trying to find out if I was only interested in her son's money, which no, I'm not. Then she asked me if I wanted to have kids. I mean, this isn't even a conversation that I've had with my boyfriend yet, so to have it with his mom felt just strange. I told her in the future I definitely wanted to have kids, but not anytime soon. That's when she said that's such a shame. I want grandchildren within 2 years. I laughed and told her that her son and I hadn't even spoken about marriage. We hadn't been together very long. long. When the bill came, of course I offered to pay for it, but she said, no, darling, that's okay. But when she looked at the bill, she said, wow, that's a lot. Mind you, she was the one ordering the expensive drinks. An hour later, I got a text message from my boyfriend. He said his mom came home crying after having lunch with me. She told him that I was rude to her, that I didn't offer to pay. Part 3. Mother-in-law is so terrible that I want to break up with my boyfriend. Disclaimer is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. That's when my boyfriend told me that his mom came home crying after she had lunch with me. She said that I didn't offer to pay for the bill and that I was rude to her. Of course, I quickly defended myself and told him that never happened. I did offer to pay for the bill. He told me that I needed to give her some time. So a few days later, I went to their house and apologized to her personally. I told her that I was sorry if I had done anything to offend her. She told me that I just needed to be a little more sensitive. So after that, I did not speak to her at all. But she noticed every time I would go over to their house, she would make comments about my clothes, my hair. On one occasion, she hugged me and grabbed my arm. That's when she said, wow, from far away it looks like you're thin, but you don't feel very thin. I laughed hysterically. Obviously she wanted to hurt my feelings, but I just thought it was funny. One occasion she brought up my boyfriend's ex, only to insinuate that I wasn't as pretty as her. I laughed at her comment and didn't say anything. She once came over to my boyfriend's apartment while I was cooking and literally proceeded to take over and judge everything that I was doing. She told me that my food was too plain and that she felt bad for my boyfriend, and that obviously he had lost weight because of how terrible my food was. The last straw was when she told my boyfriend that I was talking to somebody on the phone. I told my boyfriend I was talking to my mom, and she told him that she thought it was a man. I know it's not my boyfriend's fault, but he always sides with her. I'm always at a loss. What should I do? My mother-in-law is so terrible that I'm considering breaking up with my boyfriend. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. My mother-in-law has done everything in her power to separate my boyfriend and I. And though she doesn't admit it, she loves it. When my boyfriend and I started dating, we were both really happy, really loving and affectionate. We love to spend time with each other, so our relationship is really well-rounded. In fact, my boyfriend comes to my apartment every single day. Without me asking him, he always just wants to spend time with me. After 3 weeks of dating, we decided we'd meet each other's parents. Even though he was incredibly nervous to meet my parents, they went out of their way to make him feel at home. My parents had invited us over for dinner, and they literally made his favorite foods and even bought his favorite dessert. Needless to say, my parents loved him and he loved my parents. The following week, we met his parents. It went okay, I guess. His parents wanted to take us out to dinner, which was nice. His dad was super charismatic, funny, and made a lot of conversation. His mom hugged me and kissed me, so I thought she was okay. But throughout the dinner, she would kind of look at me and not really say anything. Basically, she only responded when my boyfriend talked. Obviously, I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I didn't tell my boyfriend anything. Next day, I get a text message from my mother-in-law. She asked me to have lunch with her. Just the two of us. Part 2 is up. My boyfriend confessed to me that he's attracted to my best friend. Should I leave him? Disclaimer is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I know you guys are gonna all say yes immediately, but hear me out. My boyfriend and I have been dating for 6 months. My best friend and I actually met him at a bar. That night, I never expected that he would ever come after me. I consider my best friend the prettier of the two of us, so I'm used to her getting hit on instead of me. But that night, my boyfriend came to me. He talked to me pretty much the entire night, and my best friend told me to go for it. So I did. He and I spent the night together, and after that, we were inseparable. To the point where he wanted me to move in with him after 2 months. My parents thought I was absolutely crazy and they didn't want me to move in with him, but I did anyway. I come from a Latino family, so this was absolutely reprehensible. I went against my family's wishes and they actually stopped speaking to me for a little bit, but luckily I got them back. My boyfriend during that time gave me all his support. He told me that my family would come around eventually and that they would see that we were in love. So living together was a logical next step. After 3 months of living together, I knew that I wanted to marry him, and he would talk about marriage all the time. He asked me what kind of ring I would want and what I would want for the proposal. We even started talking about our honeymoon. I was also starting to get in the best shape of my life. I was looking super snatched. My boyfriend told me that he loved the way that I look, but that he didn't want me to get skinny. Again, I just felt like he was supporting me and loving me. Around this time, my best friend started dating somebody. After a few weeks, they got really serious about the relationship. And of course, we went on double dates. After the third double date, I noticed that my boyfriend was getting a little annoyed. I got the feeling he was jealous of my best friend's boyfriend. Follow for part 2. My boyfriend confessed to me that he's attracted to my best friend. Should I leave him? Disclaimer is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I asked him if he was jealous of my best friend's boyfriend, and that's when he said no. But every time we would go on double dates, he would get in such a bad mood. 3 weeks ago, my best friend told me that she was moving in with her boyfriend. And when I told my boyfriend that they were moving in, his face almost went green. I asked him what was wrong and he said nothing. After that, he went into the bathroom and didn't come out for 40 minutes. Again, I asked him if he was okay and he said yeah. And I sat him down and asked him to be honest with me. That's when he said, I'm attracted to your best friend. Instantly started to cry because I had already been suspecting it. He explained to me that he didn't have any feelings for her until she got a boyfriend, and that he felt that he had some sort of ownership over her. Before my best friend got a boyfriend, the three of us would hang out a lot. And not once then did I ever get a feeling that he was attracted to her. He told me that he would never act on his feelings, but he didn't want to go on any more double dates. I asked him if he wanted to be with her instead of me, and he said absolutely not. He said that I was the love of his life and that attraction only meant attraction, that he didn't have feelings for her. A few days later, he took me to the most expensive restaurant in our city and asked me to marry him. But I didn't know what to say. I can't stop thinking that he's attracted to my best friend. Part 3 is up. Friend confessed to me that he's attracted to my best friend. What should I do? Disclaimer is not my story time. It's sending me on Instagram. After he proposed, I told him I didn't know what to say. He told me to think it over. I finally decided to tell my best friend what my boyfriend had told me. But he had confessed that he was attracted to her. First she laughed. I told her no. I'm serious. He confessed that he's attracted to you. That's when she told me I needed to break up with him. That's when I told her that he had also proposed. And she said, well then you really need to break up with him now. That's when she told me that she didn't want me to resent her and that it was completely out of her control. And I didn't. I promised her that I would never resent her for my boyfriend being attracted to her. It's not like she ever did anything on purpose to make him feel attracted. She also told me that marrying him right now would be rushing into it. And she's kind of right. We've only really known each other for 6 months. Then she told me that she's never gotten the feeling that he's attracted to her. She's never caught him looking at her or anything like that. So now her theory is that he's looking for an easy way out and that he probably wants me to break up with him. But my boyfriend is still sweet and super affectionate. He's constantly showering me with love. My best friend thinks that if I stay with him, our relationship will suffer. I've known my best friend longer. What should I do? Time about how my fiance is refusing to help me plan our wedding. Should I leave him? Disclaimer is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I'm so sad about the palette. My fiance and I met a few years ago through friends. When we first met each other, I had a really bad first impression of him. First off, he was completely up himself. All he did was talk about himself and never once asked me questions. We were surrounded by other people, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt when he asked me out. I said yes, but our first date was kind of the same. He only really talked about himself, his career, the things he likes to do, his favorite foods, his family, his dog. I eventually just started volunteering information because he wouldn't really ask me. After our date, I didn't speak to him for a full 2 weeks. I was really turned off by his attitude, but then he messaged me saying that he was really nervous and that he realizes that he probably could have been a little more talkative. I said, yeah, you could have been. I told him how I really felt and he did apologize and he asked me out to dinner again. This time I invited him to my apartment and he made us a full 4-course meal. By the way, he's a chef. Obviously, that night, I completely fell in love with him. He made all of my favorite foods, but the gourmet version. A few months later, we became boyfriend and girlfriend. There were still a few things that I didn't like about him, though. Like, he never really had anything to talk about other than himself. Exactly a year after we met, he decided to propose, and I said yes. But when I asked him to do things for the wedding, he says no. Part 2 is up. Story time about how my fiance is refusing to help me plan our wedding. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's sending me on Instagram. To be honest, when he asked me to marry him, I was totally blindsided. Honestly, felt like our relationship was starting to get stale. So when he asked me to marry him, I was like, for real? He told me that I was the first person who ever made him feel important. And looking back, I realized that it's because he only talked about himself and I really let him talk about only himself. Anyway, I immediately said yes out of the excitement. But when I called my mom to tell her, I was actually crying, which is like, okay, maybe I shouldn't marry him then. A few weeks into our engagement, we hadn't talked about planning at all. So I decided to ask him, like, what do you want the wedding to be like? That's when he told me that he didn't really care, but that he would just give me money for it. I mean, on one hand, that makes me really happy because I don't want my parents to have to pay for the wedding, and he has a lot of money. But on the other hand, I want him to be involved, especially for the food because he's a chef. I decided to hire a wedding planner because my job is extremely busy. I work in marketing. I asked him to go to a few meetings with me. He said no. When I finally found the perfect wedding planner, I asked my fiance if we could go have lunch with him, and he said no. This is when I blew up in his face. I asked him why he wasn't participating at all. That's when he told me that he was too busy at the restaurant, that he didn't have time to do anything with the wedding. I was like, okay, fine. When it came time to choosing the caterers, I demanded that he go with me. He told me that he would try to get off work, but he never did. Every time I tried to schedule it, he would say that he was busy with work. That's when I told him that his restaurant, which is super fancy, should just cater the whole wedding. And he said no. He told me they were way too busy and ready to get a Michelin star, so there was absolutely no way they could cater his wedding. That's when he said, you can handle it. I trust you. I went home and cried the entire night. Part 3 is up. Story time about how my fiance refuses to help me plan our wedding. Claimers know my story time. Is sending me on Instagram. After I got home and cried, he came home and asked me what was wrong. That's when I told him that he didn't seem excited about the wedding and that leaving all the planning to me made me feel like I was his employee, as if I had nothing better to do, which I do have my career just like he has his. Not to mention the fact that me picking everything I want for our wedding makes it feel like it's my wedding and not ours. He told me that I was overreacting. He also said that he was excited for the wedding, but that he was too tired and too busy to even think about it. That's when I told him that I was really busy and I was really tired too. And he begrudgingly told me that he would carve out some time this week so that we could speak to some of the caterers. I told the wedding planner and he started setting up some meetings. But of course, my fiance canceled on the first 2. He did show up to the 3rd one, but all he did was criticize the food. Then we went cake tasting. I expected this to be fun. When my friends have had cake tastings for their wedding, they always have so much fun. As soon as we showed up to the cake shop, he asked me, where did you find this? That's when I told him that our planner had found it. He said it looked like a supermarket bakery. That's when I told him that I don't mind supermarket bakeries and that it was probably just as good as a French bakery. He laughed and said, wow, you're funny, babe. We tasted the cakes and he actually liked them. Thank God. But then he requested to go to more cake tastings. We ended up going to 5 other places. This was already too much for me. I got a new account at work and I'm still trying to lose weight for the wedding. So him making me run around trying to taste cake is like the straw that broke the camel's back. After 2 weeks, we finally decided on a cake flavor. Most people must have fun planning their weddings, right? But I just feel like I'm drowning. I have to make all the important decisions on my own. I decided to involve my mom and sister and they've helped me so much. Of course, the wedding planner is helping me too, but ultimately the decisions have to be made by me. He hasn't made any effort to help me with anything else. I kinda wanna break up with him, but I feel like this isn't a big enough reason to break up with him. What should I do? Secretly hate my husband, but I can't leave him. Disclaimer is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. My husband and I have only been married for 2 months. We dated on and off for almost 7 years. So when he finally proposed, I was actually really happy. The problem is that we never lived together before we got married. He never wanted to move in with me when we were dating. He also had this thing where he wouldn't want me to come to his apartment randomly. He would always schedule times where I could hang out with him at his apartment. This all seems suspicious, but I really wanted to marry him, so I just decided to overlook those things. But now that we're married, I see why he didn't want me to come over and why he had all these strange rules. It turns out that he's incredibly messy, lazy, and is super picky about the food he eats. So now that I'm his wife, I'm constantly having to clean up after him. Every single time he goes to the toilet, he always leaves skid marks, or for some reason, he always has like explosive poop and it goes everywhere on the bowl. So every single time I go to the bathroom after he does, I'm always having to clean it up. And it makes me so angry that I have to clean up after him that I have begun to hate him. Also, he's super picky about his food. We can never go to restaurants because he never wants anything on the menu. And if we ever do go to a restaurant, we have to go wherever he wants. I love all types of cuisine, especially Indian, Mediterranean, Japanese, but he thinks it's gross. He comes from a very American family. He grew up eating chicken nuggets and grilled cheeses. To him, anything with some spice is way too much. That means I can't cook what I want because he always complains about the smell. Thankfully, he's got an office that's 30 minutes away. So when he leaves, that's when I cook. But I have to make sure to air out the apartment before he gets home. I'm always doing his laundry and cleaning up after him. Every single time he shaves, he leaves hair everywhere. I actually hate this man now. I told him that I don't want to live with him anymore, but he freaked out. He's begging for me to stay, but I'm so unhappy. What should I do? Am I the asshole for cutting off my jealous mom? Disclaimers is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. Then she somehow managed to get jealous that my dad and I were getting along super well. She called my dad while my dad was visiting me and threw a tantrum about how she needed him to go home. So my dad cut his trip short just to go be with my insecure mother. After that, I really didn't speak to my mom for about 2 months. I couldn't believe that she always managed to make me feel less than. And somehow she always made everything about her. I reached out to my brothers and asked them if they ever felt the same about my mom, and they said no. My mom was totally different with them. She took care of them and doted on them. Probably because they're boys and not me, because I'm a girl. One day I decided to call my grandmother and I told her everything. That's when my grandma told me that my mom has always been that way and that I just shouldn't take it personally. Apparently when my mom was growing up, she did not have any girlfriends. She always liked staying away from other women to not have any competition. But I told my grandma that she's my mom and that she shouldn't see me as competition. Grandma suspects that something is wrong with my mom, so, I don't know if she's bipolar or something, but obviously I can't diagnose her. Thankfully, I have other women in my life, my grandma and 2 of my aunts. They act like my mom's more than my own mother. When I graduated college, I was actually engaged. My fiance and I bought a house and we started planning our wedding. And of course, my mom wanted to help me plan it. I really didn't want this, but I decided to give her a chance. But once again, she managed to make everything about her. The entire time, she criticized my choices, even my wedding dress, which I absolutely loved, and it really did look good on me. She told me I needed to wear something more flattering. And then she ended up wearing my wedding dress in a different color. After the wedding, I decided to tell my dad and my brothers that I was going to cut my mom off. My dad begged me not to, but I still went ahead and did it. I called my mom and told her that I needed some time apart from her and that I did not want her calling me. Of course, she pretended like she had never done anything wrong in my life and that she's only been the perfect dedicated mother that she wishes she could be. Instead of arguing with her, I told her to just give me some space. She agreed to it and I haven't spoken to her in about 3 months. My dad and grandma keep begging me to talk to her. I don't think my mom is sad at all. She's always posting to her Instagram. She goes to Pilates, brunch with her friends, and travels with my dad. I think she's probably fine. But what should I do? Am I the asshole for cutting off my jealous mom? When I was going through puberty, my mom started comparing my body to hers. She would say things like, you know what, it's okay that you're not developing as quickly as I did. Or that her boobs were already much bigger than mine were when I was 14. Here's a little backstory on my family. My mom has always been extremely dramatic and I think toxic. I feel bad calling her toxic. On the other hand, I have a great relationship with my dad. And my 2 siblings are both guys, so they don't have the same experience I did with my mom. My dad always acted as a buffer between me and my mom, even though my mom was the one that was starting all the fights. When I got into high school, I realized how attractive I was. Honestly, I had no clue that I was even a pretty girl. Looking back now, I realized that my mom really did make me feel like I was less than. When I started getting attention from boys in high school, I was really happy. I finally felt like I was seen. And because my mom wasn't there, I was able to thrive. Whereas in my house, I would even dress down in front of my mom just so that she wouldn't get jealous of me. The first time I brought a boy over to our house, my mom totally flipped out. She said that I was acting like an SLUT, but really, this boy was only a friend. My dad, thank God, told her that she needed to relax and that I was allowed to have friends. Eventually, I started dating a boy behind my mom's back. I did tell my dad, though. My dad was actually happy for me. This boyfriend was like my best friend. I could tell him everything, and he always responded really positively and gave me really good advice about my mom. But one day, one of my brothers let it slip that I had a boyfriend. My mom punished me for an entire month. My dad tried to intervene, but my mom went crazy. Here's the thing. She made me break up with him, and then I caught her flirting with him. Part 2 is up. Am I the asshole for cutting off my jealous mom? When I caught her flirting with my now ex, who she made me break up with, I pretended like I didn't hear her. But she was flirting with him. She told him that he had really good muscles and that he looked a lot older than he was. Thank God, my ex didn't respond and went home. Afterwards, I confronted my mom and told her that I overheard the conversation. She told me that I was being a snob. I didn't talk to her for about 3 days. On the 3rd day, she came crying to my room. She wanted us to make up. So she decided to take me shopping at the mall. Being the toxic person that she is, she managed to make everything about her. Tried on a bunch of clothes, which actually did look really good on her. Oh, by the way, my mom was a model back in the 90s, so she's kind of stuck in that mindset. She thinks she's the most beautiful person. She thinks she's the best. Anyway, when it was my turn to try on some clothes, she said that I looked a little too tubby, that I should maybe lose a few pounds. I told her that she hurt my feelings and she instantly apologized. Our relationship kept going like this up until I was 18. When I finally moved away for college, I was the happiest I'd ever been. Being away from my mom was like a breath of fresh air. But of course, it never stopped. My mom decided to come visit me to college and I knew that I needed to be prepared for that. When she came over to my dorm, I made sure it was super clean. Also, my grades were super good and I basically had a few friends but no boyfriend. When she came over to my apartment, she was like, "Oh, it's so simple." I was like, "What do you mean?" She said that I needed to decorate and show my personality more. She stayed with me for a total of 3 days, and the whole time I was grinding my teeth. When she finally left, I was happy again. Then my dad came to visit. Hanging out with my dad was the best. Took me shopping for my apartment and made me feel so at home. My mom got jealous. Part 3 is my fiance faked being rich just to get me to marry him. Should I leave him? My fiance has lied to me literally over hundreds of times. It all started when he and I met 3 years ago. I was turning 32 and going through a divorce, so I had no intention of ever getting into another relationship. At least not for a long time. Come from a really wealthy family, so I inherited a lot of money when I turned 18. That never stopped me from getting a job. I started working in fashion and it was amazing. Eventually I became a stylist and had my own business. My relationship with my then husband was not going well, so we decided to get a divorce. But my ex-husband and I never really had hard feelings and we stayed friends. At the time I was living in New York and had tons of friends. Every single weekend I was going out. And since I was single, I literally had nobody to answer to. My friends and I would go to exclusive clubs and restaurants every single night. This is how I met my compulsive liar of a fiance. He was friends with somebody in my friend group. Now everyone in my group was pretty wealthy. We all drove expensive cars, owned our own businesses, and we worked really hard. One of my friends introduced me to him, and within the first 5 minutes of our conversation, he told me that he was a Calvin Klein model. Of course, I believed it because he was really attractive. And he basically asked me how much money I made a year. And I was honest with him. I earned around 300 grand a year. That's when he told me that he was a millionaire. Follow for part 2. Fiance faked being rich just so that I could marry him. Should I leave him? The very first night I met him, he told me that he was a millionaire and that he was a Calvin Klein model. Of course, I believed him because he was just that attractive. Then he asked me how much I earned per year, and I told him the truth, $300,000. The look on his face was of utter shock. He told me he almost couldn't believe that I would make that much money. And he started talking about how he's a millionaire and he models and he travels around the world. I was actually impressed. Later that night, I asked a friend that introduced me to him if it was all true. She said, yeah, he posts about it on his Instagram, so I think so. Went to the bathroom and started looking him up on Instagram. And it looked like it was true. He did model for Calvin Klein and was modeling around the world. But honestly, from his Instagram, I really couldn't gather if he was a millionaire or not. It's not like he was posting pictures of him in a Maybach or anything. That very same night, he asked me if he could come to my apartment and I said no. The very next day, he asked me out on a date and I said yes. Ended up going to a really fancy restaurant and he paid for the bill. When the bill came, it was over $1,000. Ordered so many things off the menu. But what I really didn't like was that he barely touched any of the food. The rest of the week, he invited me to all these different restaurants. On our second week, I asked him if he wanted to come to my place to have dinner, which he did. And the look of his face when he showed up to my apartment was like shocked. Finally, he asked me how much my rent was. That's when I told him I didn't pay rent, I owned the apartment. That's when he said, yeah, I own my own place too. And then I asked him, why haven't you invited me to your apartment? He said that he was getting renovations done. Exactly a month into us dating, he asked me to be his girlfriend and I said yes. Oh, I had not been to his apartment at this point. He had been paying for everything. Follow for part 3. fiancé fake being rich to get me to marry him. Should I leave him? At this point, he had been paying for everything. Every single time we went to dinner, any date we ever went on, he paid for everything. About 2 months into our relationship, I asked him again if I could go to his apartment. That's when he made up another excuse. He told me the contractor that was doing all the renovations in his apartment basically bailed on him. So his apartment was basically in shambles. I told him that I actually knew a contractor who could help him out. And he told me not to worry about it, that he had it covered. The very next week, he had prepared an elaborate proposal. He took me to Central Park where he had a band. He gave me a 3-carat pink diamond ring. Of course, I said yes. I was so happy. Never thought I'd find love again. After the engagement, I told him that we should just move in together. That's when he said, perfect. I can move into your place next week. I was like, what? He said that he actually wanted to sell his apartment. So I said yes. And the very next week, he moved into my place. When he showed up to my apartment, he literally only had 2 suitcases. And most of the clothes were kind of old and raggedy. I asked him where all of his stuff was, and he said, this is it. That's when I started getting really suspicious. I called his modeling agency, and they told me that they hadn't worked with him in 3 years. So apparently he wasn't really a model. Confronted him and asked him what was going on. He confessed that he hadn't modeled in years. That when he met me, he was so impressed that he needed to tell me something to impress me. He told me he had a lot of credit card debt and that he actually couldn't afford the lifestyle he was showing me. Then he also told me that he never even had an apartment. He was sleeping on his friend's couch. I told him I couldn't marry him or trust him, and that he was probably only after my money. He swears that he loves me. No, he hasn't asked me for money, and he's offering to actually pay for rent. My friends and family think I should leave him, but I love him and I'm so attracted to him. What should I do? Storytime about how I kissed every teacher I ever had a crush on and never got caught. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. Growing up, I was a spoiled brat. My parents gave me literally everything I ever wanted. For my 15th birthday, I told my dad that if he didn't get me a BMW, I would run away. So on my 15th birthday, I got the BMW. My parents never said no to anything. One time I told my parents I wanted to have a party at my house and they said no. I threw a tantrum and started to cry. My dad pulled out his credit card and told me to stop crying and I could go buy whatever I wanted. And I pretty much maxed out his card. He did punish me for a month, but all he really took away was the TV. As you can see, I was completely entitled. And yes, looking back, I would love to punch myself. I was a complete brat. When I got into high school, I went boy crazy. Parents told me they did not want me having boyfriends, but of course, I put up a fight. They had no choice but to let me have boyfriends. I would bring them over to my house all the time, and I would always take them up to my room and lock our door. My dad told me one time to open the door, and I wouldn't, so he just left me. Eventually, I got bored with all my boyfriends, so I would just break up with them. But one day, this new high school teacher comes in. We made eye contact for about 5 seconds. I was obsessed. Follow for part 2. Storytime about how I kissed every high school teacher I had a crush on and never got caught. Disclaimer, it's not my story time. Send me on Instagram. After we locked eyes for about 5 seconds, he looked away. But I was totally obsessed. He was like the most perfect guy I'd ever seen. And the first thing I did was go to his classroom. I knocked on the door, and as soon as he saw me, he smiled and said, come in. We talked for about 2 minutes, and he told me that he was only substituting. So I knew I needed to make my move really quick. Fortunately, I was not taking the classes that he was substituting, but I had to find a way to get close to him. So I started watching everything that he did. My school had a big outdoors area, and there were lots of tables around. And I noticed that he would go behind the library to eat his lunch. So I started going behind the library to eat my lunch. I decided to get there before he did so that it would be a coincidence. As soon as he saw me, he waved, but he sat at another table. So I grabbed my food and went over to sit with him. That's when I started asking him if he had a girlfriend. He got super red. This guy was blushing. And I knew right away that he probably had a crush on me. He basically didn't give me a yes or no about the girlfriend, but I didn't care. But I didn't want to make my move right away. I said for the next 3 days I sat with him at lunch. Finally, he asked me, don't you have friends? And I said yes, but they're all annoying. That's when I leaned in for the kiss. And no, he did not pull away. The kiss lasted for about 10 seconds. As soon as we pull away, he starts looking around to see if anybody saw. And he told me that I need to find someone my own age. By the way, he was 24, I was 17. Next day at lunch, I asked him if he wanted to go to my car. And we ended up kissing 3 more times that day. That's when he asked me for my phone number. Follow for part 3.